Income Tax 2020 Dependents Overview. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Strategy related to dependents. With dependents, we want to know the general rules related to the dependents and then go into the research when we have more complex situations. So, for example, in general, if we're talking about a taxpayer's child and the child lived with the taxpayer, most likely the child will then be a dependent. Now, we might have a more complex type of situation, however, where there is a divorce or joint custody type of situation. The general rule there is that we can't have one dependent on two separate tax returns, so that it's going to get more complex in terms of how to apply out the dependent. So that's going to be the general idea, and we might go from what if someone isn't a child to some other format of dependent, some other type of dependent, and then we might have more questions and want to go through some more research on whether or not that individual qualifies for a dependent. We will typically then start that research at the irs.gov website, looking up the Form 1040 instructions. That's probably the first place to start. There's a questionnaire type format we'll take a look at a future presentation that can help you go through the questions and then see where there's an issue or where there might be a problem within that questionnaire, and then you might want to drill down on more research related to that particular problem. Importance of dependents. In other words, why do dependents matter? We're looking at the income tax return. What does it matter whether or not we have dependents? Now, you used to have an exemption related to it a few years ago, and they basically, in simplifying the tax return, exemption no longer there at this point in time. However, there's still an impact on the tax return with the dependents, so they're going to be necessary. We want to make sure that we're calculating and putting into place the dependents correctly. So they could impact a child tax credit. So if we're talking about a qualified child, you could have a child tax credit. That could be a significant impact on the tax return. We'll talk more about the child tax credit in a future presentation. And then we could have credit for other dependents. So if you are not a qualifying child and it's a dependent, but it's some other dependent, due to the fact that, or when the change happened, that the exemption was removed, they still gave a benefit for other dependents in the form of a credit, and that would be the credit for other dependents. So notice that these two credits are kind of linked together now. When you're doing a questionnaire about these two credits, you basically say, okay, can I get the child tax credit, which would mean basically you have a child, you're a qualifying child. If not, then you're going to default back to see whether or not you can get the credit for other dependent. So when you do the questionnaire or think through this process, you're kind of combining those two together to see the impact on the tax return. There also could be an impact on the earned income tax credit. Once again, we'll talk about the earned income tax credit more in a future presentation. It's actually a bit more complex of a credit, even though it's on lower income individuals typically, because it's going to be based on, earned income, and then basically dependents could have an impact on it as well. So we'll talk about that more in the future, but again, qualifying child which would be dependents typically, could have an impact on that as well as the filing status of head of household. So if you're talking about someone who is not married, then you have a choice between typically head of household or single. You're shooting for head of household because we talked about the benefits of head of household in the past. Typically, to be head of household, you would typically have to have a dependent to do so. So it could have an impact on that filing status. Note, if you are in a situation where there's a joint custody situation, then these things kind of come to light, or if there's a divorce type of situation and there's coming to agreements on the divorce situation and there's question about the tax impact of it, then you kind of have these things in mind as well with regards to custody, the child, at least with regards to taxes. So here's our income tax formula again. So what's the impact of the income tax formula? So you're thinking about, okay, I'm trying to put together the filing status of this individual, and as you do so, you want to have in your mind, well, what's the impact on the taxes of the filing status? Well, there could be an impact to the standard deduction if there was a change from single status to head of household. So that won't always be the case, because like if there's two children or something and you may already qualify for head of household, and the second child wouldn't then be a qualifying factor. But if there's like one child possibly, and then you were single and now you have this qualifying child, then it might then push you up to the head of household. So not always an impact on the standard deduction, but in the case where you're moving from single to head of household, there would be. Could then have an impact on the tax rates if you're changing your filing statuses here. That could have an impact on the tax rates. If not, if it's not changing your filing statuses, then it may not have an impact on the tax rates. And then we have the tax credit and other taxes, so the child tax credit, and then and the earned income credit. Some of those are up top, and some of those might be down here in the refundable credit. Both the child tax credit and the earned income credit are refundable credits. So again, they could have an impact and a disproportionate impact on people that are lower income individuals, because then they might be able to, they won't be subject to the phase out most likely of the credit. They'd get more of the credit, and they might be, they might have a refundable credit here as well at this point, which means you're going to get credits beyond the point of the tax liability. You get money back without actually a refund, but more like a benefit type of program. So those are going to be some of the major impacts on the equation that you're kind of keeping in mind when you're thinking about these filing, when you're thinking about dependents. So if we look at the 1040, the dependents would basically go down here. So we're going to be entering the dependents down here on the first page of the 1040. Once again, they could have an impact then on the child tax credit on the second page here, and the other credits. This is the earned income credit and possibly the refundable portion of the child tax credit as well. So dependent types, you can kind of break them out between a qualifying child. When you're thinking about a qualifying child, the main thing that pops in your mind is the possibility of getting a child tax credit, which is going to be probably the most significant component on the tax return for qualifying child. If not, then other dependent, and again, what pops in your mind in terms of tax impact will typically be the credit for other dependents. So that's basically how the questionnaire will go, and there is a questionnaire in the Form 1040 instructions we'll take a look at in a future presentation, but it'll basically go in this order. Does this person qualify as a qualifying child? If not, do they qualify as an other dependent? And the major thing being tied to that would be the child tax credit, not a deduction, but a credit. And then if not, then possibly the credit for other dependents. Okay, so the dependents must meet 3 general tests. The dependent taxpayer test. If person in question is claimed by another, the taxpayer cannot claim this person as a dependent. So if they're being claimed by somebody else, then the taxpayer can't claim them. Now this is probably most commonly an issue when we're talking about joint custody type of situations, possibly in a divorce or just joint custody type of situations, where the question is, well, if you have one child and then 2 taxpayers and you got the custody split down the middle, then the question is, well, who would be claiming the child on the tax return? They can't typically be claimed on both. Now there is some exceptions in that particular situation, so you want to make sure you're doing kind of the research if you are in a joint custody type of situation. And in a legal process, when there's the divorce process, it should be something that's addressed within the divorce process, hopefully making it to be laid out quite easily, so the agreement being come to during that time period and being open and clear about whatever the agreement is. But that's going to be an issue. Then we have the joint return test. Person claimed as a dependent cannot file a married filing joint return unless there is no tax liability on the return. So the general rule is if someone is married, then they can't be filed as a dependent of somebody else. So if someone files a married filing joint return, they're part of the married filing joint return. Someone else then cannot typically claim them as a dependent at that point in time. Then there's the citizen or resident test. Typically U.S. citizen, U.S. national, U.S. resident alien, U.S. resident of Canada or Mexico. So then we have the 5 tests for qualifying child. So now we're kind of thinking about the questionnaire. We'll go outline it here. We'll actually take a look at a questionnaire that will go through this process in a little bit more detail in a future presentation. So the qualifying child, there's going to be a relationship test, an age test, a residency test, a support test, and a test for a qualifying child of more than one taxpayer. So we'll go into them in a little bit more detail in a future presentation, but these are basically the 5 outline tests that you got a relationship test, an age test, a residency test, a support test, and a test for a qualifying child of more than one taxpayer with, again, relationship test then. Your son, daughter, adopted child, stepchild, foster child, or a descendant of any of them, such as your grandchild, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or a descendant of any of them, such as a niece or nephew. The age test. At the end of the filing year, your child was younger than you, or your spouse if you file a joint return and younger than 19. So 19 is kind of that age that you're thinking about. 19, at the end of the filing year, your child was younger than you or your spouse if you file a joint return, younger than age 24 and a full-time student. So that's got full-time student type of rule, right? So the age limit typically is going to be 19, and then you're saying, but you can go out to 24 if a full-time student is kind of like the general rule that you probably want to have in your mind. At the end of the filing year, your child was any age and permanently and totally disabled. So if permanently disabled, then any age at that point. A residency test. Child must live with you or your spouse if you file a joint return in the United States for more than half of the year. And then we have the support test. The child can't provide more than half of his or her own support, and those are going to be the tests. So that's for the qualifying child. Now, if they don't qualify for the qualifying child, then you move to the relationship or qualified relative. General rules there being not a qualifying child. So you went through the first test, say, okay, they're not a qualifying child. I'm moving on to the next one, which is less beneficial for tax purposes. And that's going to be relationship or member of the household test, gross income test, less than or equal than 4,200. Now that's the 2019 number because we're getting from the instructions for 2019. It should be similar for 2020, but be aware of that here. Support test, more than half support. So here's the relationship or member of household test. Son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, or descendant of any of them. For example, your grandchild or brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, or a son or daughter of any of them. For example, your niece or nephew, or father, mother, or an ancestor or sibling of either of them. For example, your grandmother, grandfather, aunt, and uncle, or stepbrother, stepsister, stepfather, stepmother, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, or sister-in-law, or any other person other than your spouse who lived with you all year as a member of your household if your relationship didn't violate local law. If the person didn't live with you for the required time, see exception to time lived with you later. So these are going to be like the general rules here. Obviously, if you have a question about like the relationship test or something like that, then I would start first at the instructions to the Form 1040. Take a look at the instructions to the Form 1040, and if those don't answer the questions, then you can drill down in on that more see what else you can do to drill down in on it, to get more detail in on it. We'll take a look at the step-by-step instructions in the Form 1040 instructions in the next presentation.